Today we're going to explore the life of Henrik Ibsen, also widely known as the father of realism. I'll first talk about his history and then discuss the influence his psychosocial development might have had on one of his most cherished works, A Doll's House. Henrik Ibsen was born March 20th of 1828. That means that this upcoming spring will be marked by his 186th birthday. Yay! With the upcoming of beautiful trees, flowers, and allergens, it makes sense to explore the history, or should I say roots, trees, flowers, roots, of a man who planted the seed, for modern realist literature. So many new innovations blossomed from him and his constant pushing of buttons. As we all know, every rose has its thorns, but Ibsen was prepared and handled the backlash from his controversy very beautifully, giving him the fame and legacy he so deserves. So, Henrik Johan Ibsen was born in 1828 in Skien, Norway. He was the oldest of 5 children to a merchant father and an artist mother. As you can imagine, he took more after his mother and started embracing art in the form of painting and writing at a very young age. We could consider him a mama's boy, but we can't really blame him, since it was thanks to his father's poor management of his business that his family entered poverty in 1834. Ibsen was only 8 at this time, and he had to move to a rundown farm to survive. He was exposed to the uglies of the world quite early in his life, but this is part of what pushed him to write such pretty works. To support his family in 1844, at the volatile age of 15, Ibsen stopped going to school and worked as an apprentice apothecary, a cool word for a pharmacist, and this was for 6 years. So in his teens, the period where we are most open to exploring the mysteries of the world, Ibsen was exploring not only poverty, but also drugs. Fortunately, he didn't get too into the drugs and spent most of his free time from work writing poetry and painting. But he was not a total angel. In 1846, at the frisky age of 18, he welcomed an illegitimate son he had with a maid that was 10 years older than him. Uh-oh, scandal! The biographies don't paint this as much of a big deal, but they state that Ibsen paid child support for the child until he was in his teens, and rarely if ever got to see him. Maybe this provides even more context as to why so many of his works center around a dysfunctional family of some sort. So now with 2 families to support, Ibsen started working even harder. By the age of 21, he wrote his first play, Catalina. It wasn't a smash hit, but it was a big step for Ibsen, and it started the process of getting him noticed. 2 years later, he landed a contract with Bergen's Norwegian Theatre. It was a contract to manage the theater, but also sparked him to start writing his first plays as a professional. He managed the theater for 6 years, and during this time, he also received a grant to travel around the world for the first time. He used the grant to see the world, including many of the works of William Shakespeare, one of his greatest influences. In 1858, he married his wife Suzanne, and the following year they welcomed their son, Sigurd Ibsen, who would become a very cool author, lawyer, and Prime Minister of Norway for a brief period of time. After his very own family was up and running, he started to really dive into literature, writing entertaining but also thought-provoking works. His works also covered a vast ground of subjects that questioned the ideas of what it means to be normal and right, and if these 2 words are mutually related or exclusive. For example, Love's Comedy was a satirical look on marriage. Brand is a look into the eyes of a clergyman who devotes his entire life to his faith, resulting in pain for his family and his own life. One of his most renowned plays, Peer Gynt, peers into the world of Greek epics. In 1880, he unleashed A Doll's House upon the world, which was arguably his most controversial but also popular works yet. A year later, he released Ghosts, which dives headfirst into the pool of controversy by focusing on incest and venereal disease. Some people labeled him as an enemy of the people, and he responded by writing another play called An Enemy of the People. In 1890, he released Hedda Gabler, A story of a woman who, although she falls out of love with her husband, essentially forces another man to kill himself in order to protect her man's reputation. Needless to say, he wrote to get people's attention on the ugly side of life, and he got a lot of attention for it. Some called him a socialist, others called him open-minded. Ibsen was always up for a challenge and lived his entire life accepting and giving challenges. In 1906, he murmured his last words, which translate to the contrary, reflecting his life as a clever, respected little rebel that made many big changes. Today, his plays are still performed regularly, and we are reminded of the genius of his commentary that still resonates with us today. A Doll's House, for example, follows the life of Nora Helmer. As a proud and powerful man, Ibsen often gives voice to the underrepresented and underrespected women of the time, perhaps homage to his mother that inspired him to love art in the first place. When we first enter the Doll's House, we see a normal, adorable, disgustingly lovey-dovey couple, but we later realize that what we think is normal isn't necessarily what's right. Her husband treats her as a doll, and not in an innocent, endearing way. These family troubles are perhaps indicative of his own. The play also takes being indebted to someone to a whole new level, and if we recall, financial problems were all too familiar to the young Ibsen. A Doll's House challenges the ideas of acting normal and dancing around problems, and Ibsen doesn't dance around the problems in doing so. Henrik Ibsen is a legend. He's the father of realism, but like a mother, he gave birth to many inspirational ideas. His works were a change from the norm, and they were intended to change the norm. He was highly regarded as a modern Shakespeare of his time, and this was because he would often shake things up. He kept things interesting. He continues to keep things interesting, and as his next birthday and the start of the season of life and allergies begins, remember to spring up, aim high, and try something new. The end. Yay.